record, and we're letting everybody in. All right. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Just a few more people in the waiting room. Good morning. All right, I think that's the fastest the waiting room has ever cleared. That's great. So welcome to day 2 of level 2, everyone. I'm just going to give a very quick overview of Zoom because I know there are some people who weren't able to join us yesterday in real time but are joining today. So at the bottom, you're going to see a chat button. I'm going to type something into the chat. I'm just going to type hello. We just ask that you only type in the chat if you're having a technical difficulty. We're going to be doing question and answers in level 2 slightly different than we were doing in level 1. So what will happen is just like yesterday, at the end of each section, there will be a Q&A. If you want to participate in the Q&A, at the time we'll say, all right, now there will be some time for questions, and you click on participants, and then there's a button that will say raise hand, and you click on that, and then we will unmute you when it's your turn, and you'll get a chance to speak directly to Jeannie or Dr. Trinice, who's presenting this morning. And that will be the same if there's a call for somebody to work with Jeannie as well. Jeannie will say what she's looking for with who she's working with, and then you'll raise your hand. And for the chat again, just if you have any tech support questions, just put them in there. But I'll pass it on to Dr. Trinice. Oh wait, sorry, I totally forgot. We have Lenora Helm, who's going to very quickly introduce her jazz camp.
Thank you very much, Billy. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Jeannie, for allowing me to share this information. I just wanted to let everyone know I posted this in the Facebook group, and Dr. Trinice will be one of the instructors for our daily noon webinar and in the camp that starts August 3rd through the 7th. It's a virtual camp, and we work from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can learn everything at vocaljazzsummercamp.com, and we do a lot of things that you'll be really excited about, hopefully. Lauren Kennan will join us from New York Voices. Will Smith, who will do information, and his portion is about music libraries, taking your compositions and getting publishing. Carrie Marsh, I'm sorry, why am I so nervous? Carrie Marsh, who does wonderful jazz arrangements for vocal groups. Marlon Saunders is a performer has been with Bobby McFerrin and Billy Joel, Michael Jackson, lots of people, and he's taught at Berklee College of Music also. And did I cover everybody? Yep, and me. So I hope that you can join us. If you have any questions, just inbox me. Again, it's all virtual. It's August 3rd through August 7th. It'll be delivered through Zoom and a website, and vocaljazzsummercamp.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leonardo. That's wonderful to know. Before we go to Dr. Trinice, we moved these segments around so that she's going to go first, and then I'm going to come in after she's done. I want to encourage you to be in class on time. And I want you to encourage to have, keep your notes that you want to refresh your mind later as you go through, so that if you have questions, you can put them into the appropriate place and that they can come to me so I know what the questions are. And the next 2 breakouts are the same as the first one, so everybody will get a chance to be a teacher with a facilitator from the faculty helping you work with this. My feedback was about the first one was that you did great. You had a wonderful time. I just got feedback that some people feel like I'm being disrespectful or nasty to them, making fun of them. I'm Italian. Sometimes I'm snarky. Don't take it personally, okay? Just general comments. I've been observing the profession for a long time. I've been this way for a long time. It's not meant to be offensive. I grew up in a loud, noisy Italian household that was sometimes snarky. So I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the kind of collegial decorum where nobody ever raises their voice and nobody ever says anything negative. I don't live in that world. I live in the theater community. Theater community says it the way it is. I am not making fun of you personally. So if you feel like I am personally insulting you, then personally, from me to you, I apologize. Okay? I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. It's not my intention. I talk badly about myself all the time. I include me in all of that. I got the same amount of training the same way as everybody else. So when I'm doing that, I'm also directing a lot of that myself. Okay? That's all. Um, uh, Trinice, Dr. Trinice Robinson Martin. Yay!
Hello, everyone. All right, let me get my screen shared and make sure I do this properly. All right. I just want to make sure that you're seeing what you're supposed to be seeing. All right. So today we're going to talk about CCM styles, particularly as they appear on Broadway. This lecture today will be coming from pages 27 through 35 in your packet. So please do follow along, and I'll just be highlighting some of the things that are already written in your document. So as voice teachers, I just want you to be aware that there are some things that we need to consider when addressing the developmental needs of students that come into your studio. My thing is not working. Hold on. There we go. Before we get into styles, I really want to explore some specific considerations in terms of the type of students that you'll be receiving in your studio, particularly as it relates to the concepts or the realities that appear in these two types of demographics or these two types of studio. So one of the things you want to think about is the fact that in academia, for those that are teaching in academia, particularly at the collegiate level, you recognize that most of these programs that have CCM styles are going to be musical theater programs. And in the private studio, many of the students that you'll teach under the age of 17, particularly in the school age, will typically be performing musical theater in their schools. So we want to make sure that, that you are aware of the different possibilities. We want you to be aware of the different styles as they appear. You also need to recognize that the second style, largest style that you can actually get a degree in higher education would be jazz. There are many jazz programs that do not have vocal programs in them. However, most times for most schools that offer some level of CCM, they're going to offer either music theater or jazz. In the private studio, you'll want to think about, well, what are those requirements, particularly for those students that are interested in majoring in those programs. So you're often faced with dealing with, well, what does these requirements look like? How can I interpret those things for my students? Another thing that even though we are starting to see more CCM programs STEM, they're still very, very new and they're very few and far between. On the contrary, in a private studio, many of your students, particularly if you specialize in CCM styles, may be interested in performing outside of school. But oftentimes, the teachers that tend to be the most knowledgeable in terms of vocal function sometimes are not always knowledgeable about those requirements of those styles outside of the context of music theater. So we're going to also talk to you from that standpoint. In both situations, we're always preparing our students for industry. However, in academia, there are specific timelines that we want to be aware of. I mean, we have 4 years to make someone a great music theater singer. We have 4 years to make someone a jazz singer. In the private studio, we have a little bit of discretion depending upon what the needs of the students are. So I wanted to just bring that to your attention so that you can have that sort of compassion towards who am I dealing with, what are their reasons, and what is the context of their development. When you think about how we train singers, you're really looking at, when you're training a singer for music theater on Broadway, you really want to make sure that you're maintaining flexibility in their ability to move between genres and between styles. Whereas when we're looking at individual artistry or industry musicians, we're looking to particularly maintain flexibility of color choices in the context of stylistic expression. This is because, unlike in music theater, when you're trying to address a singer for the sake of a character, you're trying to really make sure that they are understanding how to get in and out of that character style. When you're addressing a student for their own individual artistry, you want them to be able to explore the different styles that will not inhibit their creative expression. We think about just dominant registration as being the dominant registration, even though some form of mix is going to be a prominent sound. Vocal registration from the artistry standpoint, it's usually modeling the sound quality of expressive speech as determined by the cultural context of the people that music represents. Also, we want to think about training in the context of what is pre-composed. In music theater, the music has already been composed and you're not really going to be changing keys much unless you are a high-level singer who can demand such changes. Whereas in individual artistry, you have freedom to decide that, oh, I'm going to sing it in this key, or I'm going to sing it in this key because this is how I feel today. Talking about style specifically, you want to remember that style is a musical consideration. Style in itself is a musical representation of culture and musical expression as related to that culture. Each style will have its own set of vocal values that you can learn by both listening to the music, being exposed to the culture that the music represents. Style should affect technique, but it should not be a substitute for it. Understand that you can sing in style and not have a good technique, and you can have a good technique and sing in terrible style. We as teachers need to understand these style parameters and understand how to provide the training that's necessary to address the needs of the singer. So regardless of what styles you teach, there's going to be a few points you just want to remember. First, again, most CCM styles depend on chest register and take that quality up. This can mix in some ways as dependent and determined by the genre and the cultural expectations of the style that you're in or operating in. Directly from the text, there's a very good point that Jeannie brings up that says we are not so much looking to produce certain kinds of sounds. We are looking to produce good functional coordination of the entire instrument and connection to the body, which in turn leads to control over whatever sound the singer might want to make. Some of the problems or the issues that we have in academia stem from our desire to quantify, this is what a jazz singer sounds like. This is what a music theater singer sounds like. This is what a rock singer sounds like, as if it's one defined sound. We want to be sensitive to this concept that we're not trying to train singers to sound in a specific way, rather than training their instrument so that they can make the sounds that they want to create. Also, another important thing to remember, again from this page 28, is that unreasonable demands create health issues for both the voice and the body. Abnormal requirements can create abnormal responses. So a lot of times we have to recognize the whole picture and the whole scope of what singers are going to face, not only as it relates to what they're singing, it's also how much they're singing. Again, because we know the majority of you will be at some point teaching, if not already, music theater, we want to explore these different style categories as they're found on on Broadway. You can follow with me on page 29. I'm going to go through the exercises, the examples, some of the examples that Jeannie has laid out in the text, giving you a oral context and discussion. So we're going to start with what is considered legit traditional music theater. Legit is short for legitimate. And let me just say that somatic voice work by no means is referring to classical voice training or classical voice sound production as legitimate, with the implication that things that are not classically produced as illegitimate. But because this is the term that is used on Broadway, this is the term that we are using in the text. So legit music theater usually requires a vocal quality, a classical vocal quality and resonance. Uh-oh, you're not hearing sound, are you?
I think you just need to share the screen with the sound. So if you just stop the share screen and then you click share screen again, there'll be the share computer sound at the bottom left when you click share screen.
Okay.
And then it'll say share computer sound. And then
Hima, hama, hima, hama. Okay, let's try something else. All right. Oh, okay, let's see. Now let's try this. Let's see if this works this time. Did we not go through this in the sound check? All right. Bear with me, thank you. Okay, let's see if this will cooperate now. No. All right. So I have this, I spent all the time making these adjustments, so, All right. So, give me a pause. And Jeannie, if you want to jump in right now and elaborate while I adjust these videos, that would be great.
You and Billy see if you can work out why it's not the sound.
Yeah.
Lisa, I'm going to give you a call really quickly.
Okay.
Traditional music theater, legit, back in the day, you know, there were classical singers and there were belters because they were the only ones who could fill the theater without amplification, before there was amplification. And I don't know why they called it legitimate, but they did. And then that still shortened to legit. It doesn't mean exactly the same thing now as it did years ago in terms of the sounds that people make. But we refer to these older shows where we have singers who produce a more formal vocal quality and include classical training. So that would be Christine and Carlotta in Phantom, and in any of the revivals of the shows of the 50s and 60s by Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Lowe, Frank Lesser. They were written for those voices. South Pacific was recently revived, and there's a lot of speaky belting in that, mixy belting, but then the character of Emile Debec is really an operatic bass baritone. So you need to know that that's not completely gone. But if you're training your students to only sing classical literature and they don't know how to mix belt, then when they get to that music, they may have trouble. And then if they get with somebody as a music director who doesn't really know voices, and they're saying, you know, we more sound, or get it out, or something, they're going to try to make up what they think that is, and then there's a good chance that they're going to get hurt. At the same time, when we're dealing with music theater, as Trinice pointed out, you do have to articulate the words. There have to be consonants, and in real life, in the music industry, sometimes that matters, but other times not so much. So you always have the situation in a music theater production, um, with some exception, that you are always in the character who happens to be singing in a musical. Whereas when you're singing outside of that, uh, you're just singing as you, expressing the words as meaningfully as it can be for you. But you don't have to be a character. That's a big difference. So remember, when you're working with students, if they're not used to developing a role or developing a character, then they have to do all the work that actors do to make that happen. Whereas if they're just going to sing in a band, or they're going to sing in a club, or they're going to sing on tour in um, a, a group, then there is no character. They just are themselves, and they need to find the musical and lyrical expression that they want or that the group agrees upon. When we go to the shows which are more in the middle, which will come up, sometimes you have a show that's mostly rock, like American Idiot or Jesus Christ Superstar. But then you have a whole bunch of shows, especially recently, that have some of everything. Spamalot was like that. They had rock songs and country songs and folk songs and patter songs and all different kinds of songs in one show. And that's actually a fairly common way to write these days. So that means your students really have to be able to sing healthy sounds with all these inferences. And as Trinice was explaining, you can be stylistically very appropriate, but still have not quite the right vocal color in the sound. Or you can have a great voice, but then when you go into that style, you just don't understand the parameters of that style. So the goal would be to make sure that you have both things. Some of it's listening and exposure. So if you're not used to a country song, what does country music sound like generically? If you're not used to listening to rock music, I mean, most of us know rock music, but you have to listen to it. The thing about the commercial music styles, and much of the music that is not either legit music theater or more formal music, is that it rests a lot on the rhythm. And so classical people sometimes are not comfortable going away from the written page. So it's good to work with jazz. It's good to work with styles that allow you some freedom, so you get the difference between the meter, the beat, and what the rhythm is doing in the beat and moving around, and also maybe varying the pitches a little bit. It takes a long time to get really good as a jazz virtuoso in terms of improvising musically the way we think of an instrumentalist doing that. And the jazz singers who are free improvisers and who can scat and go all over the place musically have worked hard to learn how to do that. But even with those people who are not doing that, a little variation here and there is enough to make you not sound like you're only singing the exact notes on the page, which often comes across as being stilted or stiff, or I guess they still call it square. And that's an ear thing and a confidence thing. Now, I don't know. Trinice, how are we doing?
Just 1 second, Jeannie.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. You know, the frustrating part is, as many online lectures as I give for something so remote to be issue is kind of like, what? So continue.
All right. Well, I'm going to kind of talk about other stuff, and then when you are ready, we'll just go on and you can show them the examples.
Sounds good.
So pop music, of course, is the most dominant, and now I guess the most money-making is rap, hip-hop rap. That's kind of like the top of the money-making chain. And then pop music is right under that. So the shows that are pop-oriented go all the way back to like the 70s, really, where you had shows like Grease. Now, Grease was written in the 70s to reflect the music of the 50s. But that pop influence is borderline again, what pop/rock. And most of the present moment shows are pop rock oriented. It's a very common style. So if that's not your home base and you're not used to it, you need to listen and you need to pay attention to what might be the differences between, I don't know, Ariana Grande or Cardi B, and that, a rap person is not exactly a pop person. There's not too much crossover back and forth there. And so then you want to start to talk about, well, what is it that makes that different? Insofar as heavy duty rock music, we have had that on Broadway as well, not quite as much as some of the other styles. So American Idiot, Grease, School of Rock, Starlight Express, Brooklyn, Spider-Man, written by rock people. You have that as the basis of the music. So it's not that you would never find a song in those shows that fits into those categories, but the majority of music is in that style. So
Jenny, so sorry to interrupt. We're just going to very quickly just tech check this one slide and just make sure that the audio is working properly.
okay.
And so thank you everybody for your go and can everybody hear this? Could we just hear the singing? Yes. Yay! Okay. All right, everybody, just give 1 second and Trinice will be right back. All right, everybody, we're back. No matter how many tech checks you do, things can always go a little funny. We were borderline ready to ask the faculty to be ready to sing to demonstrate style, but nobody will be surprised with that. Even though that could have been fun too. So I'm going to make Trinice the co-host. And so now I am running the slides and Trinice is running the presentation. And so Trinice will just say next slide when she's ready for me to click anything. So.
How I was the way they are, really loved what is so the night when everything's alright. But what can we say? They are made of tomorrow and yesterday. Let's walk, it's true. Let's see, let's walk.
So as you're watching, and I want you to go ahead and follow along on page 29, you'll see that this particular style requires a much more classical vocal and quality and resonance. For all voice categories, the sound will probably have a little bit of chest in it and will typically use unmodified vowels. While the style will still use operatic production in terms of resonance, and the performer often is allowed some discretion in the formality of the delivery. Men are usually barytenors, which use high, light baritone voices or heavy tenors. Bass roles are few and are done by character actors. Know that legit is now the rarest category for new shows and is scarce even in revival, as classical elements is softened towards a more contemporary commercial feel. Billy, go ahead and move to the next slide. What I'd like to show you, for the sake of context, is how this particular sound would present itself in industry. And this is particularly for those participants here that may not have that experience, may not have the experience of being around this style of music. Go ahead, Billy. Next slide, Billy. Like legit shows, the revival of these shows tend to have a more contemporary spin on their vocal delivery. When we're talking about traditional music theater, we're talking about a belt quality that is rarely carried over C5 and typically maintains a strong mixing sound that could substitute for a belt quality in local shows, but not on Broadway. Why? Because there are so many people that can make this sound in so many different aspects that you don't necessarily need to settle for someone that cannot produce this sound as a strong belt quality. Go ahead and play this slide.
I got rhythm, I got music, no. I got my gal who could ask for anything more. It's better than 4/4. It is. I got daisies in green pastures. I got my gal who could ask for anything more. That's great. Quisling. All man trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams. Stop it! I got my gal who could ask for anything more. Who could ask?
Next slide. Music theater tends to mirror what is popular of that time. And so many of the traditional music theater shows that are in the canon typically mirrors what was popular during the 1930s and 40s. This is an example of Billy Eckstine and his orchestra in Rhythm of the Riff. One of the things that you hear often and you see often in this particular style is Hollywood is big during this time period. And these are the type of sounds that they are emulating in the traditional Broadway shows. Go ahead and play the track.
I love the rhythm in the riff. When the music comes, I can lift body, little anything to make it swing. I love the muted trumpet tone, blended with a mellow saxophone. What a lot of kicks it brings. When that rhythm's in ya, the blues don't have a chance. Find that groove in ya, make you never think about romance. Jump, jump your rhythm with the riff. Any kind of music it's a lift body, anything to make it swing. lovely dance. When that rhythm's in you, the blues don't have a chance. Find that groove will win you, making everything.
Now let's move into pop rock or pop light rock. This CCM style, as found on Broadway, requires a strong speech-oriented delivery, typically mixed and or true belting, clear delivery of lyrics, and strong personal style. Pop Broadway singing is mostly about sounding like what's on Top 40 radio station at any given time. Go ahead and play the
Isn't my name up on that list? Does someone know that I exist? Is this a mistake? Am I even awake? Pinch me now to make sure. Yes, that's my name in black and white. Maybe I'm doing something right. Wow, I feel so much better than before. Warner, sorry I've been a pest, but I guess my best was not working with you. But looks like I found a cure, and I so look forward to working with you.
What? Working with who?
Hey, remember when we spent spring break in the hot tub every night? You said nothing else could ever feel so right. Well, this might singing my name up on that list. That be the first time that we kissed. Thought I was dumb, but I think that somebody done it was more. Singing my name.
In terms of Broadway, a pop sound, you can go to the next slide. A pop sound will be amplified, but there's not usually a lot of electronic effects like there would be in industry. Outside of music theater, most emerging pop singers are very young and attractive. Pop icons are sex symbols who may or may not be able to sing. Many of the vocal limitations can be camouflaged by auto-tune, other electronic manipulations. Pop singers are expected to dance at least a little bit. For males and females, high voices are more marketable than low voices. Go ahead and play this clip.
Just love, we can dance until we die. You and I will be young forever. You make me feel like I'm living a teenage dream. The way you turn me on, I can't sleep. Let's run away and don't ever look back. Don't ever look back. My heart stops when you look at me. Just one touch. Now baby, I believe this is real. So take a chance. Don't ever look back. Don't ever look back. I'll get your heart racing in my skin tight. Be your teenage dream tonight. Let you put your hands on me in my skin tight. Be your teenage dream tonight.
So as I mentioned, when we were talking about when you're training a singer for music theater or training a singer for industry, this is one of those time-sensitive, these are one of those time-sensitive genres in such that if you're training a singer to be a pop singer, you're really looking at a age 16 to 30 age demographic. So age becomes a very important characteristic in this top 40 style when you're looking for commercial singers. Let's move on to heavy rock bands. CCM styles, as found in Broadway, this style requires strong, sturdy vocals, powerful delivery, distinctive style, clever use of words, and physical stage presence. Go ahead.
You're not the Jesus of suburbia. The Saint Jimmy is a figment of your father's rage and your mother's love. Maybe the idiot of America. It's not over till you're underground. It's not over before it's too late. This city's burning. It's not my burden. It's not over before it's too late. I've seen things I can't take, the meditate on
singers in Broadway shows must also be excellent actors. And these two abilities don't always go hand in hand. Sometimes the very fact that singer's voice is raspy, hoarse, or rough, or unpleasant is considered an asset by both the performer and their associates. So this is a really important distinction in terms of teaching, that when a singer comes in saying, I want to learn rock for music theater, rock for American Idiot is going to be very different from the rock style and characteristics that you'll be conditioning them for a pop rock song. Go ahead to the next slide. In industry, this is exampled by Rancid.
That's what they tells me now. You want it now. They won't get out of spoon. It's just a never fail. The one thing we will end in a night for what I'm time. We'll the flow, trouble flow. Never could then cry. Nah, nah, nah. If you want the truth. Nah, nah, nah. If you can't see it through. The end jack of the gun. Ordinary gun. Don't let Maxwell motherfucker you. Maxwell gotta understand. He knows the job is found. Tell rock before you bought it. Maxwell knows you got it. The one in the back, if we wanna get a knife for one at a time. We're the flow, trouble flow. Never could commit crime. Nah, nah, nah. If you
Continuing on page 31, those who perform in front of a band or play and sing in a band can be doing very demanding vocal work in a different sort than on Broadway. The single biggest obstacle to overcome with a young singer in a band is convincing the singer to rehearse at modest volumes for a good part of the rehearsal, and to have him or her convince the band that the singer's throat isn't a steel guitar. Those that work with singers know this issue well. The young singer, the less time and less volume, the better. The greatest vocal danger is too high and too loud for too long. Go to the next slide. Rap is a style that is more newly accepted in Broadway and CCM, as it's also appearing in multiple styles: country rap, rock rap. All of these different influences are bringing in the tradition, the rap tradition as found in the Black music tradition. In Broadway, it requires a strong speaking voice, a rhythmic sense, and assertive personality, as demonstrated in Hamilton.
Two Virginians and an immigrant walk into a room diametrically opposed foes. They emerge with a compromise, having opened doors that were previously closed. The immigrant emerges with unprecedented financial power, a system he can shape however he wants. The Virginians emerge with the nation's capital. And here's the pièce de résistance. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened, the room where it happened, the room where it happened. No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens.
Go to the next slide. The style of rap is basically assertive, percussive, rhythmic speech as executed in a specific cultural context. In developing a rapper in the voice studio, you can work on posture and breathing, relaxation, and flexibility, but what you are trying to really manifest is a sense of being comfortable in this assertive, passionate speech, creating stamina, and making sure that they really understand the culture that this music represents, particularly when dealing with rappers that are coming from outside of the Black tradition. This is an example of rap in the context of industry.
West Side, so you know the real bell down.
as you notice in these examples, I'm trying to use live examples because it gives you a different context of what a rapper or a hard rock singer would do in a live context, the level of energy that is required. A lot of rappers like to sing their own hooks, particularly now. So many rappers, when they're coming into the voice studio, are also looking to develop their speaking voice, but in their singing voice, but in a much more speaking voice context. Next slide. Let's look at gospel, R&B, and the blues sound as demonstrated on Broadway. I'm on page 32 if you're following along in your book. This style requires a strong voice with a wide range, strong emotional, authentic communication, and the ability to improvise. Let's listen to this.
I believe I have inside of me everything that I need to live a purposeful life. And all that love in me understands all this free. I'm capable every day that I'm given. Both the easy and hard ones I'm living. But most of all, I'm thankful for loving who I really am. I'm beautiful. Yes, I'm beautiful. And I'm here.
Next slide. For industry reference, this is Tamla Mann singing gospel song, God Provides.
So tonight, close your eyes, there's no more need to fight. Watch God provide. Can provide. He will. Whatever you need, I know He will provide. Yes, He'll step right in the nick of time. Yes, He will. He'll open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing. You won't have room to receive. So tonight, close your eyes. There's no more need to fight. People of God, watch God provide.
So one of the things that I want you to be listening to as I'm playing these industry to music theater as on Broadway sounds, I want you to be listening to their vocal characteristics. I want you to be comparing them to what you hear in industry versus music theater. And it's interesting to see how close these styles become in more contemporary theater. So it's no longer as it was back in earlier traditional, where there was much more of an appropriation of trying to sing these styles in a way that may be healthy regardless as to whether or not it was stylistically appropriate. Now they're recognizing that there are plenty of people in industry that are singing these particular sounds in a way that is maintaining these contracted styles, but these contracted sounds, but are still able to come out just as Tamla Mann demonstrated in this particular song. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's talk about folk, country specifically. CCM Styles has filed on Broadway for country requires simple speech-based delivery with some occasional belting or falsetto. The story is strong, and the message of the story is just as strong. Go ahead and play this track.
I may be tired of the running fever, but I'll be headed south to the mouth of the Ohio. So look out for me, oh muddy water. Your mysteries are deep and wide, and I got need for going someplace, and I got need to climb upon your back and ride. Look out for me, look out for me, oh muddy water, muddy water. Your mysteries are deep and wide, and I got need for going someplace, and I got need to climb upon your back and ride. Look out for me, oh muddy water. Your mysteries are deep and wide, and I got need for going someplace, and I got need to climb upon your back and ride.
As I mentioned, generally folk music is simple and direct. Any special effects would be frowned upon. With any ethnic style of music, it's important to understand the culture from which it comes and the values that culture gives to the music before trying to listen with Western musical ears, as Jeannie wrote on page 33. In the country style, as found on Broadway, typically the Tennessee accent is used, Nashville being the most prominent avenue or the prominent epicenter for country music, particularly right now. The twang is in the sound. It's either genuine or should sound as genuine as it can be, and do not distinguish twang in terms of an accent with the sound that one would typically call brassy as it relates to sounding like a trumpet. Vocally, all of these styles can be addressed in ways we've discussed, but you will again have to use your judgment as to which ingredients you will use to achieve these desired effects. Let's listen to country music in industry as it appears now.
Back it up, pulling the string on a 9.92 stroke. Mercury. I love it when my baby wants to roll with me. Throws her boots on, climbs in a tree. She's tucking her hair in my hand, she's ready to go. And we get to hunting, fishing, and loving every day. That's the brand that a country boy prays. Thank God he made me this way. Hunting, fishing, and loving every day. Early in the morning, late in the evening, I'm getting red dirt rich, the Clear River pay. Hunting, fishing, and loving every day. Come on!
Lastly, let's look at jazz as found on Broadway. Many of the jazz shows like Ain't Misbehavin', Jelly's Last Jam, Swing are very dance oriented. But there are a few like Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill that are centered around voice. Of course, it's centered around one person, the story of Billie Holiday. Let's listen to Audra McDonald playing this role.
Yes, the strong gets more while the weak ones fade. Empty pockets don't ever make the grade. Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own. That's got his own. But when you're gone,
I think she did an excellent job in capturing the essence of Billie Holiday. One of the things that, as I mentioned before, you want to be careful in your developing singers for Broadway, particularly when you're teaching styles, to try to use one sound as the sound. This is what you have to do to sound like a jazz singer. This is what you have to do to sound like you have to sound like this person. I mean, you have to sound like this person if you want to sing country. You have to sound like this person in terms of specific characteristics. She is sounding like Lady Day because that is who she is playing. So we want to make sure that you're not training all of your singers to sound a certain way. Know that this jazz style requires a smooth and fluid sound, vocally flexible, vocal strength, have good breath pressure, good control, pitch accuracy, and a sense of musical spontaneity. You can go to the next slide. What I'd like to show you or share with you is this clip of Betty Carter, who is well respected within the jazz community as the real first lady of jazz, as some might refer to her. But one of the things that we find very interesting about this particular singer is she represents what the contemporary jazz artist is looking to do: explore the colors in their voice and explore the ways in which they can tell a story in order to communicate. Go ahead and play this track.
I happened to pass your doorway, gave you a buzz, that's all. Lately I thought much about you, so I thought I'd pay a social call. Do you recall the old days? We used to have a ball. It's not that I'm lonesome without you, I just thought I'd pay a social call. I'd lie and say things are just swell, but to tell the truth, I haven't been too well. So if you should try to kiss me, I promise I won't stall. 'Cause maybe we'll get back together. Starting from basics, accidental, elemental, simple.
All of these excerpts, so you know, we will post the link, a YouTube link for a playlist, so you can watch these in their entirety. But I just want to say, you can go ahead and go to the last slide. Thank you for listening. What I want you to be considering is, what is it that you heard? What did you hear? And how does it impact or relate to the characteristics that you feel that you're going to need to address in order to make sure that your singers are performing in a culturally viable manner, in a way that is true to themselves and their instrument? Thank you for listening. And thank you, Billie, for saving me.
You'd never need any saving. You are amazing.
Amazing and fabulous, and thank you so much. And what a wonderful compilation explaining the difference between the Broadway configuration of the styles and the industry configuration of the styles and the overlap, and also how you can have generalities and you can have individuals with uniqueness in those under those umbrellas. This section was, I wrote this section because in traveling around doing classes in music departments and a lot of classical influence, it was my experience that many of my classical colleagues did not have a lot of personal experience with any of these styles. And since the industry, the music theater industry is heavily going in that direction, this was my way of giving you just a little nudge. And now, of course, there's so much available on YouTube or other sites that you can learn, you can listen, you can look. So if you are in a department that's dealing with music theater, whether it be a jazz department or a classical department or a theater department, or if you're a choral person, but you're going to do music in your chorus that comes from these genres, please learn about them. Please don't just assume that whatever you know, because you know it, is going to be enough to carry it across and make it believable and viable, and basically for me, respectful. I think Trini said it beautifully when, she said, you want to understand the cultures from which this music comes. And I would encourage you to listen to Nashville, where, in that part of the United States, they talk a little bit like that. That's the twangy sound. Oh, hey, bing-a-ding-a-bing-bing, bing-a-bing-a-bing-bing, they've modified that a little bit more as they've come into the more country pop. They don't have quite so much of that. But if you go into real heavy-duty folk music from Appalachia, that's what it sounds like. And it sounds like that from Mississippi sometimes, too, so that whole region. That word, twang, goes all the way back to the 20s and 30s from the people themselves who call it that. Now, I want you to go to page 36. So now we're going to talk about, if you sing those styles, what kinds of things come up. Now, we've already touched on that in level 1 this year, and also yesterday in level 2 when I worked with Dawn. But I had also worked with Beth the day before. If you're a high belter, one of the characteristic issues with high belting is it gets grabby and goes what, and kind of almost like a choking feeling. Why? Because when you make those sounds, these muscles are really working hard and they're pulling everything up and in. That's part of how the sound is made. Whereas in the classical sound, it does not do that. That's partly registration, laryngeal height, and partly vowel sound modification, and then pressure, volume and pressure. So it's not just one thing, it's a bunch of things that adjust that the singer needs to understand, but you also need to understand. And one of the reasons that's important, and now, take out your little hat on, I'm gonna be snarky again, I have enormous respect for my speech pathology colleagues and for people like Barbara Wilson-Arboleda and the other people like Jan Potter-Reed who have come here to share their knowledge and expertise. But there isn't a lot of training for voice in speech pathology, so when we deal with some of the vocal aspects of it, they can sometimes be well-meaning but not necessarily helpful. I recently observed at a medical facility somebody who was a Broadway belter, guy, who developed a vocal problem. I don't know if it was a polyp or a nodule, but he was treated by the doctor, and then he went to the resident speech pathologist who was at that hospital at that time. She's not there now. And by the time they were finished working with him, all the muscles that were involved in pulling the larynx and making that high drivey sound had been relaxed into oblivion. And of course he couldn't belt anymore, and he was very upset about that. And after considerable work, they told him they thought he should consider taking up another profession. And when they played the example, I thought, well, of course he can't belt. He sounds like Bing Crosby.
Everything was relaxed and flow phonation.
And that's also the danger with classical training. If all you're ever doing is going, relax, relax. Some of those people who were singing were not what you'd call relaxed. They were conditioned to be comfortable while making very vigorous use of the musculature in the throat, all of it. So if your goal is to keep your student relaxed all the time, and all you know about relaxed is Yonsei, and you're going to deal with this music, you're not going to be helpful. And that is a criticism. You can't camouflage it and make it be nice. It's not that I don't love you, I do, but you also have to deal with the real world. And so the reason we have these sections is because I've encountered this, not because I sat in my house and thought it up. On page 37, I have given you some examples based entirely on my personal experience. This is not science. Nobody studied this. We can't go prove it. You have to just read it and take my word for it as basically food for thought. When we talk about the traditional music theater legit, we saw Renee Fleming in Light in the Piazza. I think she was singing with Norm Lewis. After a while, the transitions from chest to head can get uneven. Sometimes the vowel sounds get distorted. You can have problems in different areas with the high voice and the low voice. Depends, they have to speak. Classical singers, generally opera singers, don't have to use their speaking voice very much in terms of performance. So just being able to speak is challenging for those people. I think Renee Fleming made a wonderful transition into music theater in the shows that she's done. And good for her. If you have the more mixy-belty thing, you get all the same kinds of problems that you would get if you were doing different styles. And you certainly can get tension in the tongue in the back. You can get, the vibrato can be affected. I don't really want to read you every single item on each of these lists, because you can do that on your own. It's primarily if you're teaching, and let's say you have you have somebody that sings gospel in church in your community, and you work with this person and you realize, wow, their tongue is so tight up in the back, and that sort of gives them jaw issues too, because of course they're interconnected. Or their head is like stuck and their neck is stiff. You have to teach a lot of people to realize that, oh, this is a pretty common problem with these folks. It happens in all kinds of people. High voices, low voices, big voices, little voices. Maybe it has something to do with the style of the music. Aha, light bulb. Right? So what you want to do is you want to accommodate that. So when I worked particularly yesterday with Dawn, we're not trying to say, oh, Dawn should do her high belty some other way. What we're saying is, how much effort can we shave out of the high belty without making it go away? How more comfortable can it become without having it be different? When you're working with somebody in a show, you cannot make them sound like somebody else or something else just to help them vocally. When I worked with the cast in Rent, who they were doing so much singing, I was trying to get them to ease up on the sound and yet still make the sound. And in pretty much the people that were in the cast, they all reported, they felt it was easier, they felt better, but nobody else knew that they had changed anything. I didn't want them to lose their jobs, right? And this is also the case where you're looking at efficiency, not necessarily yawn-sigh relaxation, although as a compensatory exercise, you might do yawn-sigh movement, because that's a way to unwind the sound. Now, I would normally get out the whiteboard and write this, and I don't have a whiteboard on my fireplace, so you'll have to just write this down for yourself. But the exercises that we do as singing teachers are generally speaking in two categories. Either they are about relaxation and ease and freedom, and that's about making the voice more pleasant, or they are about strength and power and dynamic energy, and those are the exercises that work everything until it's really a powerfully resilient system. So when we talk about vocal athlete, we're talking more about this aspect of things. Being able to sing loud and high over and over again and sound good and feel good requires both strength and an overtime stamina. And we talked about that. If you're going to do four sets in a gig, that's a lot. So you don't just do that with no idea what you're doing, unless all you ever sing is that. You need to understand that the functional training is supposed to give people the capacity to sustain had a nice, wonderful young jazz student, came from one of my highly regarded jazz colleagues, who would lose his voice by the end of a set. And he had no training, although he was very musically trained, no vocal training. By the time he had worked with me for 6 months, he could do the whole set in the gig and have voice left over to talk to his friends in the room. That's the kind of progress you want to make. I wasn't telling him how to sing jazz. I can't do that. But you want to be able to give the person the power and the energy to sing whatever they sing and still have a voice afterwards. And as long as the demands are not ridiculous, nobody, no matter what technique they have, can sing for 6 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, there's such a thing as vocal load, which Barbara talked about, and you have to understand that. Okay, so on page 38, I gave you some examples of matching the physical person and a style. And some of those things are more appropriately done than others. So I gave you the first example of, you have a delicate-bodied teenage female who has little vocal training, isn't particularly strong in her ribs and abs, and has a light, breathy speaking voice. And she's about to start singing in a heavy rock band. And, you know, that's looking at trouble, right? And so you have to be honest with the student and work with that. The second example is if you have a robust older man, low, loud speaking voice, how you doing? Gonna take to some chorus singing. And it ends up being kind of early music in a church chorus, gonna have problems. And then if you have a stocky high school baritone who isn't particularly physically active, spends all his time on the computer, he is in a situation where he has to do something with his voice he's not normally used to, you have to take a look at what is it that you can do, and then that's why I gave you the time frame. If you have an unlimited amount of time, oh, then it's not so bad. You can let the voice gradually grow and change and adapt. But if the school musical is in 2 or 3 weeks, you don't have a lot of time, so you need the solution sequence element of the time frame and the age parameters in order to work appropriately with this particular student in a short period of time. What can you do that's appropriate? And I gave you those guidelines because this is something we run into all the time. When I came down to the explanations for the first girl, you have to explain to her what's involved in singing that kind of music, and that she has to develop not only her voice but her body, and that she needs to deal with speech, because that's a large part of it. That's also what rap is, talking, finding your speaking voice in a way that works. And you might have to go work with a speaking voice coach, because they exist. And that the rest of her life, she's going to have to keep track of how she eats, how she sleeps, and depending upon whether or not this is I had a colleague whose daughter was auditioning for one of these little girl groups. Like, you know, they pick 5 teenagers and they put them into a group and they make them like the latest pop successes. And they were looking for not only attractive young women who could move and dance, but sing lots of different parts. But then there was a whole structure about the touring and all that. It was a big deal. On the other hand, of course, it was a big opportunity. So these things can come up, or if they audition for American Idol or The Voice or something like that. If you don't have an understanding of the music, as Trinice just taught us, then how are you going to give advice that's useful? What kind of advice are you going to give them? Oh, just vibrate your forehead, darling, and you'll be able to figure it out. And I would say when I was a young person and I was training with a person, my teacher was a lovely woman who had me sing classically. She didn't give me much training, technically, I guess because I could kind of already do some stuff. But also she was not overly, she was very much an old-fashioned teacher who was focused on the music and teaching me other things. But when I crossed over to do music theater, which I did first when I was 17, nobody told me how to make an adjustment. I had to figure it out. And when I was 19, I did Bells Are Ringing, which was written for a woman whose vocal range was a little bit more than an octave and kind of a squeaky chest. So again, I was on my own. And I found that when I went back to try to sing in church, I had a lot of trouble that I did not have before I did Bells Are Ringing. Nobody could explain to me what the trouble was or why I had it or how to get rid of it. So when I wrote this, I was thinking about all that and about real life consequences. A lot of the impact that I want this course and this material to have is about practical application. Because knowledge without being able to be practically applied isn't particularly useful. It's one thing to be intelligent, it's another thing to be wise. And so the idea is to have some wisdom and to count all of these factors as being significant. They're not insignificant. And they fold into your awareness of what you're doing technically so that it has a broad context. Okay? And so when we talk about, Denise didn't mention, say, cabaret singing, but Nat's just issued a book, So You Want to Sing Cabaret, and it has the absolutely wonderful David Sabella, who is a phenomenal teacher here, very busy, wonderful singer, and who was Mary Sunshine on Broadway in cabaret for, not cabaret, help me out.
Chicago.
I knew it was a C. For 9 years. He also has sung many professional concerts at Carnegie Hall, and he's a beautiful Broadway singer. But he has a wonderful cabaret show, and that book talks about the cabaret as a CCM style. And if you were going to point to, like, vocally, is it this or that? No, it's all things. And you can have all kinds of stuff under the umbrella of cabaret. So if you're a classical singer and you're going to do a recital, is that a cabaret? No, it's not. So I'm trying to keep informing you about the context and your intention in the context and the knowledge that you have to have about helping this instrument, whatever it may be, first develop itself into an instrument, and then to work through the vocal technique issues that take you into the demands of the style. And then if you ever do work with an established professional artist who is working in the world as a something, session singer, backup singer, out there making money with this particular way of singing, when you work with them technically, you want to give them exercises to compensate. And there are many, so that they can, sing however they sing in the performance, but then the next day they do all these other things that kind of rebalances the machine and brings it back home to that nice neutral place, chest, mix, head, bright brows, dark brows, posture, breathing, always bringing that home from this way over here. And I give this example almost every year. When I was working with one of the Mimis in Rent, she had been in the show for a long time, and she finally decided she wanted to go on. So the first gig she got outside the show was a summer stock production of Candide, and she was hired to play Cunegonde. So she went from Rent to Cunegonde. Now, if you don't know that, it's an extremely high soprano role for a lyric coloratura. She had gone to school and was a soprano, but a lot of the work that she was doing was more mixy, belty, chesty, and certainly Rent was that. So we had 2 months to get her ready, and some of that time she was still in the show. So in the morning, she would vocalize, "Then silver head register. Oh, well, we vocalized up here a lot." And then before she went on stage, she would do a different kind of warm-up to warm herself into her red sound so she could do that show. And she, bless her heart, worked hard, managed to keep the two things going. And then when she left the show, we got her ready. She went and did the performance. And I was talking about this in live, audience. And somebody said, yeah, she was great. And I looked at the woman and I said, well, how would you know that? And she said, because I was there. And I said, you were there with so-and-so? She said, yeah. I live in that area and I wanted to see the show. And I saw in the credits that she had just been Mimi in Rent. And she said, how many of those people could there be? And I thought, wow. So you can be performing this way and warming up this way and end up here. Okay? And maybe you don't have a lot of opportunity to do that with students, because they're students, but I still want you to know, because in your life you might move, you might go someplace else, you might end up dealing with the population, and you should have this in the back of your mind. So that is kind of the essence of this whole section, and I'm finished, so we have like a few minutes for questions for either me or Trinice. I guess I have a question for Trinice. Trinice, would you tell people who don't know what a hook is?
Oh, I'm sorry. A hook is the chorus. I apologize for that. So the hook is the chorus that's repeated.
Okay. Now, anybody else? Billy, you can tell us when we have some questions.
We do. Sandy Cressman, I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, Jeannie. Good morning or afternoon. I wrote down a question when we were talking about traditional musical theater and legit requires classical vocal quality and resonance. And as I was forming this question, it was sort of informed by bright and dark vowel things that I've learned here. So my question was going to be to describe what the classical vocal quality is, and does it have to do with darker vowels than another style?
It actually doesn't.
Okay, that's why I'm asking. Good.
What I would call vowel modification. So Trinice played us a beautiful example of Nadine Sierra singing, "Beautiful dreamer, waken to me, starlight and dewdrops are deep." That production is modified. It's done for the sake of the aesthetic values. So if I were talking to you, I'd be saying, "Oh, beautiful dreamer, Sandy. Oh, yes." Well, we don't talk like that. And we particularly do it as women, we do it up high, but the men have to do it above the break as well. Because then if you don't do it, Renee Fleming was a good example of not modifying the vowels very much. I don't know if I can do that, but let's see. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. And my left vocal cord doesn't do that. But that's not modified. Still head, but not modified.
So modified meaning from the spoken vowels, it's modified in a way to...
It's a different position of the tongue inside the mouth, and then that affects the space in the back. There are people who are taught or who teach classical singing so that everything remains in that kind of longer, darker shape. But that isn't a universal principle. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are other people who don't do that, and they're still singing classically in a way that's very acceptable. It's just not quite so long and thin, long and skinny. Does that help?
Yeah, that clarifies a lot. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, and so I'm going to Ayelet Furstenberg. I'm going to unmute you. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Done. Okay, thank you. Jeannie, I'm looking at the functional voice problems, and I'm curious about what it is about mixed belt that leads to pitch problems. That's something I used to have before I started doing somatic voice work and training my head register. So I'm wondering, do you know what that's about?
From a scientific standpoint, no. Let's say, oh yes, this is blah, blah, blah. My empirical understanding is that there's pressure on the mechanism because it does get a little constricted, and the constriction sets the tongue into a rather rigid position inside. So a lot of the work is done like and you're pressing down on the jaw and the tongue in the back, and of course the larynx is stable. And then the shape can't adjust very much because the rest of this stuff doesn't allow it to adjust. So if you don't get a really bright vowel sound, you lose the high frequency amplifications. The harmonic stuff up high gets dampened, and then the ear of the listener hears that as being under pitch. Okay. Now the singer might still be singing the note very accurately in terms of how they hear, but if you have a lot of in the sound, it tends to get flat. And so it has to be both an acoustic phenomena and also physiologic response, which usually gets better, as you said, if you sing, I'll get a little more head, get a little bit of that lighter, more flexible sound in, and then usually it self-corrects. So again, that's an example of a compensatory behavior. I mean, did you stop belting?
No, I do both now.
Right? So the idea is not to say, oh, well, if you just don't sing that way, it will get better, of course, but that's not the real world. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, we're out of time. We are at our break time. And so I just go over what's going to happen here. From 12:30 to 1:15 Eastern Daylight Time, you have a break. Then you go at 1:15 to your second breakout. And we'll go over about that in a sec. But you're going to have a new teacher. You'll still do the same thing you did in breakout 1. And then after your breakout, you have another break. So you're bracketed by a breakout, and a break. And then after your second break, I am going to come back and get feedback from you about how the breakout went. And we're going to go over the bodywork stuff in preparation for our bodywork lecture with Dr. Jan Prokop. Now, Billy, do you want to remind people how they can get to the breakout group?
So you were emailed all of your breakout links by Meredith, and you should have received those yesterday, so you'll just want to check your email for that. And it's just make sure that you're following the columns correctly, because it's not the same link as it was yesterday. It'll be a different link.
Okay.
And then I know Amanda has an announcement as well. And people have been asking the solution sequence cards. That has been moved to a slightly different place of the schedule. And because it was only 10 minutes, we didn't want to send out a whole new schedule. So just so you know.
Yeah.
So hi, I have an announcement about the participant recital tonight. If you are one of the few people who, due to international time zone, you're not performing live and you're sending a video, that needs to get into that Dropbox folder the Google Drive folder that I emailed out ASAP so that Jocelyn, our MC, can get that all set up for tonight. We're going to meet in a room. Billy, also need that link from you as to whether it's the regular link or it's going to be a separate link.
Yeah, so it's the same link that we use for all of the optional evening sessions. So we'll make sure that gets posted in the Facebook group, or if you go in the Google Classroom, it will be the link under optional evening sessions.
Excellent. So we're going to meet there, the participants, at 6:45, just to make sure there's no other sound things. And please remember to watch Billy's video to make sure that you have all of your sound settings configured right so that it'll go nice and smooth. Right, that's all.
I also want to remind the people who are going to sing, there's a lot of people who wanted to sing. Please don't do 5 minutes of singing. We asked you to stick to 2 minutes or less. And I mean, we'd love to hear you sing for an hour because we know you're wonderful. But please, if you know you haven't timed your selection, please do that, because it's really the only way we can have an abundance of people sing. And I want to let everyone who's new here, this is their first time with Level 2, this was added by the participants out of popular demand. because they wanted to sing for each other. And it became like the favorite thing. So it'll be really enjoyable to see people from all over the place sing for each other this evening. Okay.
There's one other announcement I almost completely forgot from Theo. So Theo, I've unmuted you.
Yes, I just want to announce that for those who are not doing level 3, I am teaching a workshop on creative singing in the jazz realm, but not exclusively, on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is through the Jazz Conservatory. There it is. There's a link. And maybe for those who are not in 3, you would like to join. That'd be wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay. So have a good break.